everybody. My name is Trey Ratcliff. Nice to meet you. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about HDR and Photomatix. I'll show you how I use Photomatix to do some basic stuff. This isn't meant to be a full-on tutorial or anything. I'll show you the basics to get you started. If you want to know more, we have a multi-hour set of videos that you can get on the main site at stuckincustoms.com. Also, pretty much everything I'm going through here is written out in a free tutorial, sort of a step-by-step written guide, so you can take your time and go through it. All right, let's get started. First, I'm going to show you the photo that we're going to work on today. Take this full screen here. So this is the photo that we're going to work on in Photomatix today. This is of the space shuttle, the final night on the launch pad, and I think this is a really good candidate for HDR. Let me show you a few other HDR shots, and these are ones that I've worked on over the years, and I've used Photomatix on them. This is the bamboo forest in Kyoto, Japan. Forests are typically very hard to shoot, and a lot of these situations that are very hard to shoot often come out better in HDR, at least to me. This is a really good example of HDR because typically you can't shoot into the sun. It's kind of a problem. And when you're standing there, you can see all the rich texture on the asphalt. You can see the golden hues in the wheat fields. You can see the blue sky and the yellow sun, and it all just comes out with HDR. Here's another good example of HDR. It's a sunset shot, and clearly the sun is behind this gal. Yet she's still well lit from the back side without using lights or anything artificial like that. Just feels like a very nice and fun way to take a photo. Here's another good example of HDR, and in these last few examples, they've all been backlit. That's not the only case for HDR, of course, but these are sort of extreme examples and shows why it works well. So if you're standing there in front of this horse, of course you can see all of the details on his face and flaxen hair, that sort of thing, even though the sun is clearly setting behind him. These are my kids. Aren't they cute at Christmas? And I think HDR adds a really nice element and a nice feel to many situations. HDR is also great with reflections and sunsets, and so this photo kind of has both of those and gives a good example. It kind of intensifies and lets you really explore the color space in these places. This one is the first HDR photo to hang in the Smithsonian, and that made my mom very proud. I did this many years ago, back in the day when I was just getting started with Photomatix. Since then, I've learned a lot more, and I'll share some of that with you today. And you don't always have to have a whole rich array of various colors in an HDR image, because it's really about the light. So it works great with monochromatic and black and white images as well. It can bring out new texture and new depth. These sort of situations work great too, these dusk situations. And of course, it helps the colors play off of one another, especially if you're already shooting a scene with some complementary colors in them. If you're into landscape photography like I am, then HDR is a godsend, and running your photos through this method really come out nice and exciting. This is a beautiful treetop temple in Kyoto, Japan, and there is something about this method that gives it a nice feeling. Something that's hard to put your fingers on, but you do feel sort of a warm glow coming out of this place, and a bit of a cinematic feel to the whole scene. This is a forest in Yellowstone. One thing I like to do with my HDR photos is always make sure there's a little bit of black in there. Maybe you've seen a lot of photos that don't have any black at all, where everything appears to have some sort of color or tone, and I think black is important. This is another good example of an HDR photo. This kind of photo is otherwise impossible, unless you have all kinds of rigorous lighting setup and situation. But again, it kind of communicates the feeling of a warm cabin on a cool night, and there's wildlife frolicking around and this sort of thing. This is Hong Kong. This is sort of an example of extreme HDR, and I vacillate between extreme and basic based on my mood. And maybe you have one preference over the other. The next one is sort of an example of a more simple HDR treatment. This is Central Park in the evening, and not every situation calls for HDR, but many do. And I think it can add a lot to many different situations. This is the subject of my first HDR tutorial that I created several years ago. Since then I've learned a lot, and we continue to evolve it, and I add to it every 3 months or so. So you know, this was part of the free tutorial, and I've since changed it. We still have a free tutorial on the site, and where you go step by step, but now we just are using the shuttle picture instead. And last, this is an example of an HDR photo taken with a single RAW file. You don't have to have multiple exposures. I won't be covering that in this tutorial, how to make an HDR out of a single RAW, but I use Photomatix for that as well, and it's quite easy and fun, actually. All right, so let's get started. Let me minimize this. And I'll pop open our Finder here so we can see what we're working with. So we have 5 photos, all right? Now HDR doesn't require 5 photos. It doesn't even require multiple photos. But in this situation, we will use 5 photos. These are 5 exposures. This is the -2 exposure. This is the -1, 0, +1, and the +2. And in case you're unfamiliar with what HDR does, is it will take the best pixels from each of these component photos and weave them together into sort of a final tapestry that makes the most sense. And by using this Photomatix software, we can change the way in which these pixels get weaved together. So let's open up Photomatix here, and I'll show you how it works. So I'm going to say load bracketed photos. And then I'm going to go choose those photos. All right, these are the 5 component photos. I'll say load. Okay, that's just confirming what I chose. I'll say okay. And I was on a tripod in this situation, but it was a little bit shaky. So I'm going to say align source images. And I did not check this crop because I often like to go do a final crop myself at the very end. If there was a lot of movement in the photo, which there wasn't in this one, but I could check reduce ghosting artifacts, and that takes you to another step where you can take care of that. I could do noise reduction at this step if I wanted to. I could also check this to reduce the chromatic aberrations. If you're not sure what all this stuff means, if you just mouse over it, it gives you a little bit of tooltip help. So I'll click pre-process. And this will then take these 5 photos and start running them through the HDR algorithm. And at the end of this process, I'm going to get a new set of controls, these sort of Willy Wonka-esque sliders, and I can adjust the photo so that it looks the way I want it to look. Okay, well here we are. I think it already looks better. It's already an improvement over any of the component parts. I'll go through here and show you a little bit about my favorite controls and how you can use it for success as well. So if you want the most basic, simple stuff, they have all these presets over here that you can just click on and choose one that you like with all kinds of variety. I'm sort of at the point now, since I process thousands of these, that I don't use the presets. I go over to the sliders. And I'll show you the sliders that I use the most often, rather than go through an extreme description of every one of these sliders. I think that might be a little bit of a waste of your time. I'll just show you the best, what I use most of the time. So I'm usually always using tone mapping and details enhancer. I crank up the strength to 100%. Color saturation always varies. Okay, it depends on the component photos. But you know, if you crank it up to 100, then things get a little bit too electric to me. You know, the eye needs a break from all that saturation. And not that 65 is a magic number or anything. You know, your mileage will vary based on your component photos. Luminosity, this is another one I use a lot. the further to the right it is, the kind of more painterly it becomes. The further to the left, the bigger the contrast levels between the various subject matter. Oftentimes I use it somewhere between 0 and +5. Detail contrast, this used to be called micro contrast. This allows you to adjust the detail at the sort of pixel to pixel level. Okay, so the more you drag it to the right, the more detail you'll see down low. Lighting adjustments. This is how natural or HDR-y the photo will look. All the way to the right, it looks most like it's right out of the camera. And then all the way to the left, especially if you go into these lighting effects, you kind of get this awful HDR look that looks like you're on drugs. And I like to say friends don't let friends do HDR on drugs, so don't do that. I keep it up around 0 to 5, somewhere in this territory. Okay, it depends on every photo, of course. I only use really 3 other sliders most of the time. I'll show you what those are. Now by default, black point is down here all the way to the left. Okay, I don't like that. I always crank it up a little bit because to me, having black in the photo is important. I think black helps give other colors their vibration. So make sure you get that off the back side there. White point also changes based on the photo. If it's too high, you'll get blown out areas, right? Which sort of defeats the purpose of HDR in the first place. So I'll drag that down a little bit so it's a little bit more manageable. Okay. The last one that I use is micro smoothing, and this adjusts the contrast level again on the small scale. So if I bring it up, you'll see everything just gets a little bit smoother, and maybe you want that smooth look. If you go all the way to the left, things get a little bit more gritty. So if you want that gritty HDR look, this is the slider to use. Okay, and then you just click process, and it will create a final image for you, and you'll be good to go. Everything will be right in the world once again. Okay, and here it is. Very simple, as you can see, very fun, and a really kind of satisfying experience, I think. I might go do some final cleanup in Photoshop with some cropping and whatnot, but essentially you can see how simple this process is. If you want to know more, I've got a full HDR video tutorial that's many hours long, and I guide you through all different sorts of situations and final cleanup and so on and so forth. Or we have a free tutorial on the site where you can go step by step through these as well. We have a free ebook. We have all kinds of resources, and every day I put up a new photo. I talk about the experience. I talk about how I shot it, and we've got a really nice community of a bunch of people learning together and so on and so forth. So you're welcome to come join us. Okay, well, thanks for your time. I hope this was helpful for you, and I'll see you later. Thanks.